current state of the university's budget. We move quickly to the next slide. To reiterate what Patrick has just been saying, the reasons we're in this position right now are due to the cut and then freezing of the tuition by provincial government. Our estimate is that up to the end of the current financial year, this will have cost Queen's approximately $240 million. In addition to that, our international student enrollment has fallen from its peak in 2019. It fell during COVID, or admissions fell during COVID, and haven't really recovered up to their pre-COVID levels since. So the peak that we reached in 2019 was 668 enrolled undergraduates, international undergraduates, and last year, 2022, was 414. I'll be able to update Senate on the current position of 2023 in a moment. In addition to the falling revenue, we have faced increasing costs. These are not really a surprise to any of us. We're all exposed to the inflation that has gripped the economy in recent years. Our estimate is that that's about 16% since 2019. And of course, the inflation applies to goods and services as well as salaries. And in a university like ours, the salary budget is about 2/3 of the total expenditure of the university. Overall, what I would say is that Queen's has allowed expenditure to rise during times of plenty and hasn't reduced it quickly enough when times got tougher. I know there's a certain amount of skepticism, perhaps sometimes justified, about the budget, which in the end is a forecast of the financial future. But just to show one actual place where we can show that we really had this issue, at the end of last year, the end of 22-23, if we take out the funding for the Queen's Centre, the operating costs exceeded our revenues by 20 million. So the costs of simply running the university were 20 million more than the money we brought in. Thank you. Could you move on? Move on to the next slide. Okay, thank you. So we need to address this budget deficit. We can't let this carry on forever. Queen's and all universities really are very resilient organizations. Universities are some of the oldest institutions in the world. And we will emerge from this difficult time in good shape and, stronger than we were when we went in. Our goal is to try and be as transparent as possible. We have been communicating over the last few months, and you can find all of these communications and FAQs online at this email address, at this URL here. Our priority has to be the academic mission. We have to continue to deliver the highest standard of education, maintain a robust research program, and excellent teaching. Next slide, please. Queen's, for just over 10 years, has been running a budget model that hasn't really changed significantly in that time. It's a decentralized model that is designed explicitly to give faculties agency over their own spending. Faculties generate their own income through tuition that's paid by students or government grants or research overheads, and they run their own budgets. The provost's role in this is to run the budget model, or rather in the provost's office, the budget model gets run, and through that to decide on the budget allocation for each faculty, basically to do the maths. The shared services that all the faculties access are funded by charging faculties for their projected use of those services. And the total cost of shared services is capped at an increase of 2% per year, with the exception of this year when it didn't get any increase at all. And then my job after that is to ensure that deans hold to their budgets. So if we can have an overview of where we are currently after the end of the first quarter, hopefully quick overview. December is the end of the first quarter of the academic year. This showed that our revenue is tracking budget. There have been losses linked to lower international student recruitment and lower graduate revenue, but these have largely been offset by other unbudgeted revenue. Overall, after Q1, the deficit is lower than it was anticipated to be at the beginning of the year, which is obviously good. This, however, hides a kind of detail, which is worth trying to understand, which is that this change in the overall deficit is produced because the shared services have come into a small surplus, while the faculties and schools are actually now projected to have slightly higher deficits than previously budgeted for. Next slide, please. We're also in a position, because we're at that point in the year, to have first look at what the budgets for 24-25 and 25-26 look like. 24-25 shows a structural deficit in all faculties, but the vast majority of this is in one of the faculties, the Faculty of Arts and Science. Shared services continue to show a small surplus. The year beyond that, again, is quite similar, with shared services showing a small surplus, but faculties unable to reach structurally balanced budgets by 25-26, largely due to the size of the budget reductions that are required in the Faculty of Arts and Science. At the beginning of this year, we created what is called the Deficit Mitigation Fund by imposing a 1.5% tax on all units, shared services and faculties. This Deficit Mitigation Fund will be used to alleviate the budget pressures in faculties and schools. A bit more detail on where we are this year. I'm not going to go through this table in a lot of detail, but you can see here that at the very bottom line, you can see that the projected deficit at the end of this year has gone down from 62.8 million to 48 million, which, as I said, is a good thing. I think we can, we can go forward to, we don't need to worry hopefully too much about a lot of the detail that's in there. Faculties in schools at the end of this year are showing a slightly increased deficit, 2.8 million increase in the deficit. Shared services, as I said before, are showing a surplus of 8.7 million, with the majority of which is due to a single $4.5 million unrestricted donation. Obviously, that's not something that's going to happen every year. No, can we go back to the last slide, please? The graph underneath shows the deficits by faculty. The blue is the deficit that was projected at the beginning of this year, and the orange is the current projected deficit. You can see that most of the, well, for 4 of the faculties, they've moved, if you like, in the right direction. The deficit has declined. For 2 of the faculties, the deficit is actually increased. The biggest one of these is in arts and science. And this is due to 2 factors, really. The inability to meet the international student recruitment targets this year, and lower than expected faculty retirements. Next slide, please. To talk briefly about undergraduate enrollment, as usual, our domestic enrollment is very buoyant, with all faculties, bar one, really hitting or exceeding their target. I think the commerce miss by 18 is really just a blip, is not really something that we're terribly worried about. More important issue comes when we're talking about international students, though. The next slide for international. Okay, and you can see that all the faculties except commerce missed their international enrollment target, sometimes by quite a considerable margin. And overall, the campus is 152 students below target. This is a significant problem, and I have to emphasize that the targets that go into the budget setting process come from the faculties. These are not targets that are invented by Central. These come up from the faculties and are their suggestions. So if we go to the next slide, we'll see what the financial implication of this is. So you can see that overall, for the entire campus, this might be as much as a $12 million shortfall in revenue, which is considerable. You can see that most of that is in arts and science. Next slide. And this is because, and this is, I hope, widely known to everyone, our international students pay substantially higher tuition than domestic students. So a single international student in the first year is worth 55,000 to arts and science, 59 to Smith Engineering, and so on. Multiply that by the 4 years that they're likely to be here, you can see that international students are worth a considerable amount of money to the faculties. There are many reasons for wanting international students. They massively enrich the life of the university and the diversity of our campus, all sorts of other things, but they also help our finances. When we fall short on international enrollment, this has a major impact on our funding. Thank you. Next slide, please. I want to talk to you a little bit about the preliminary budgets for the next 2 years. If you remember, we have made a commitment to try and get to structural balance by 25-26. You can see here that overall we're quite close to that, but that within the faculties in schools we still do not make it. Okay, so you can see that the carry forwards at the end of the year, you can see at the bottom line there that we're in structural deficit in the faculties in both of the 2 years. We're in slight surplus in both of the 2 years in shared services, and overall the university is in slight projected deficit in the 2 years. So we come very close to meeting our commitment, but not quite there, admitting these are forecasts. Next slide, please. This is what the more detailed budgets look like across the faculties. And you can see when you look at it this way, that the overwhelming majority of the projected deficit in 24-25 is sitting in the Faculty of Arts and Science. You can see out of the overall deficit of 17.7 million in the faculties combined, 13.8 of that resides in the Faculty of Arts and Science. Go to the next slide. This just shows that graphically, if anyone. I personally find it easier to see a picture rather than the numbers. So this is just for people who have a brain that's wired in the same way as mine. Next slide, please. 25-26 is a broadly similar picture. You can see here that the majority of the faculties are in balance or very, very close to balance. Arts and Science is the only one that is significantly away from structural balance by that point. Of course, like any budget, these are forecasts and they're predicated on faculties hitting their enrollment targets. They're predicated on the retirements happening in the way that faculties are projecting them to happen, and so on. So these are all future events which have a degree of uncertainty associated with them. To get to these budget projections will be very hard work. There's a lot of things that have to be done between now and this point in order to actually get this financial future to appear. Next slide, please. You can see here, this is again a graphical representation of the deficits. Thank you. If we go on. I think that this picture, this table shows the picture quite well. You can see on the top line there that the reserves as they were at the end of 22-23 by faculty. You can then see the projected deficit, the current projected deficit by faculty in the second line, and then you take one from the other and you get the projected ending reserves at the end of this year. Do the same thing for the year after that. You can see that the reserves are gradually diminishing in most cases, not all cases, but most cases. And in particular in arts and science will actually disappear sometime in 24-25. This is the point where we will have to deploy the deficit mitigation fund. The bottom table shows the size of the projected size of the deficit mitigation fund. As I said, this has been created by taxing every unit 1.5% and putting that into a central pot, which will then be deployed to underpin the finances of faculties and schools that cannot make their budget balance. So you can see here that we have, at the end of 25-26, we're projecting 14.5 million in the deficit mitigation fund, whereas arts and science are likely to need 20.4 million. So you can see that there's a gap, but you can see that the deficit mitigation fund will make a significant difference to closing that gap. Next slide, please. This shows a picture of the reserves. Again, just showing it graphically as they change over the years. The reserve in education looks larger than it probably is in reality because education have committed themselves to a capital project in their building so that they can redevelop part of their building, and that will cost them about 20 million. Next slide, please. So the budget plan is still being updated and will continue to be updated, and we're trying to get a clear picture of where we are. In the end, Queen's is one university, and we will be working together to try and make sure that we resolve the current situation. Elements that are currently not represented in the budget, because we haven't been able to do that yet, are the flow through of the enrollment declines from this year. So as I pointed out earlier, some missed targets in the faculties. These will have an implication on the coming years as well as this one that hasn't yet been modelled. We haven't modelled in the impact of any things that need to be done at Bader College. As most senators will know, there are issues at Bader College and we've had to bring the students back to Kingston. And so those are the two main things that we know we're going to have to worry about, but are not currently represented in the budget. Unfortunately, it's fairly obvious that both of those were likely to be negative. Last slide, please. So I want to just leave senators with this to say that we are accountable for the resolution of the budget situation. Faculties and schools are responsible for the responses that have to be made to adapt to their budgets at their level. The principal and I have implemented a task force that tries to oversee the actions that are being taken to reduce budgets and to facilitate kind of conversations across Queen's so that we have a good understanding of what's happening across the entire university, and try and minimize the risk that Queen's is exposed to as we go through this process. So that is effectively the last line. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Matthew. So we can go to questions now. Karen, if you would care to pass those questions along, and we can deal with them one by one.
Yes, senators, feel free to raise your hands and they will appear in order for us, or you can post to the chat. And I think your first question is from Senator Olmsted.
Stella, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. First, I want to say, in terms of the background context, I doubt that there's anyone on this call who is unaware of the fact that government policies have led to financial crises across the province. So that, I think, is a given. I'm more concerned with discussing what's happening internally with the finances that we have I'd also say I have no doubt that Queen's will survive, but I am worried about what it's going to look like at the end of this process. So the first thing I want to ask about is the current budget model, which all of the presentation that we just heard from the provost is based on the idea that the current budget model we have will continue in the future. And I'll point out, these are questions that I submitted in advance, so I'm sure everybody has seen them, but I'll just read it for the benefit of people that haven't had this. So in a letter to Queen's faculty and staff, February 15th, 2022, Principal Dean noted that a review of the current budget model was underway with recommendations from a steering committee to be communicated broadly by spring 2022. And so according to the website, the review of Queen's budget model, recommendations from Huron Consulting Group have been submitted and are under consideration. So my first question is, what's the status of this review? And if the current budget model is to be altered, how is this impacting the restructuring of programs and operations that are resulting from the budget cuts?
Thanks, Stella. I'm happy to speak to that. So indeed, we did do the review of the budget model, and you'll remember that came out of the strategic planning process because a number of the issues identified across campus in terms of our ability to realize some of our goals were linked to the budget model and what it can and what it cannot do, where it provides incentives, where it does not. So we had a review. There are two things I would say about it. One is that the recommendations were not all that helpful. I mean, in essence, the consultants recommended things we knew would ordinarily be the case anyway. The need to build a central strategic reserve, for example, to increase the university fund and so on. So I think it's safe to say that the recommendations of the review were not either convincing or determinate of a clear path forward. The other issue is that we were at that time engaged in the search for our new provost. And since the provost has oversight of the budget model, as Matthew explained, it seemed prudent to wait until the new provost was on site before we began to embark on any significant changes to the budget model. And the thing about the budget model is that it's very difficult to tinker around the edges with it because it integrates so many different aspects of the university's operations that any kind of major modifications will have significant consequences across the institution and its operations. So I think we can see, and it is implicit in some of Matthew's slides, that there are ways in which the budget model, well, it helps us see what's happening financially, certainly. But if you look at the situation in arts and science, it's clear that were a different budget model in place, and here I'm talking about things such as the contribution of the faculties to central services and issues of that sort. Something of the challenge which faces arts and science could be addressed through rethinking the budget model. But the point that has to be made about it is that the resources coming into the university are finite and circumscribed. So a budget model doesn't produce more money, it just distributes it in a different way. So I think, to sum up, we're still in the middle of the process of rethinking the budget model. In some ways, some of the issues we're being forced to deal with now bringing into very clear relief where there is a need for work to be done on the model. I hope that answers in some way.
Thank you. I don't know if there's anyone else ready to ask a question, but as a follow-up, given that we're operating under the current budget model and the information that we received, especially given that most of the deficit is in arts and science, and at the arts and science town hall, there were statements made that, well, there would have to be transfer payments essentially in order to allow FAS to survive. So if that is the case, and there's been no discussion about how these transfers would occur. So what would happen with these transfers in the short term? Who makes them? How are they initiated? Who's involved in those decisions? How does it protect? We have some small faculties such as law that face real constraints because they have international competition.
Thanks. I'll go to Matthew on this one.
Yeah, so in the short term, at least, by which I mean the next year or so, then we will be using the deficit mitigation fund that I mentioned in my presentation. So effectively, that has been a change of the budget model. We've introduced a new 1.5% tax on everybody in order to create that fund, because we anticipated the need to provide a safety net for faculties and schools that might have problems. It looks like that problem will be in arts and science, and we'll need to deploy the deficit mitigation fund to basically remove the deficit from them once they run through their reserves. So at the moment, they're paying, their reserves are covering their deficit. At some point in next year, that will no longer be possible, and we'll have to bring in the deficit mitigation fund to make sure that they that doesn't happen, and they don't just accumulate debt.
Other questions?
Yes, you have a question from Senator Pilkey, followed by Senator McQuaig.
Great.
Yeah,
Please.
thank you for the presentation. I think it was very enlightening. One of the things you mentioned, Provost Evans, that's not been accounted for. In fact, you said two things: Bader College, and there was something else I've now forgotten. But also the issue of the new contracts for our staff and otherwise. I don't think that's, as we start to plan, I believe those contracts are coming up in 2025 and are going to represent another significant issue in terms of budget. So is there any planning for that as well, in terms of how that's going to impact these projected surpluses and deficits?
Yeah. The other thing was the enrollment issue. So we know what the enrollment, the international enrollment was somewhat down this year, but we know what the impact will be this year, but we haven't modelled it into the coming 2 years. So that's the other issue that was on that list. I think you mean the kind of bargaining arrangements when you say contracts. We have made certain kind of planning assumptions around what that might come out with, and have built in certain assumptions about that. But obviously, again, that's a kind of future issue that we don't know exactly what will happen, but we have made certain assumptions about what could happen and have tried to make a kind of prudent assessment of that.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Keith. Kate.
Hi there, thank you very much. One pressing concern amid the budget deficit and resulting budget cuts is this issue on campus of communication. There's a notable sense of apprehension on campus characterized with leaks, heightened anxiety within the student population. What measures does the university intend to take to enhance this communication strategy on this topic? And can we expect the administration to establish specific timelines for announcing future decisions? And as a kind of part two to that question is, does that at all differ from the communication strategy for incoming students who are accepting offers of admission presently?
Okay. Yeah. Communication to students is obviously important. We need to keep that going. This came up a lot at the ASUS meeting on Monday evening. Since then, I've been trying to think how we could do this. It's for various reasons not practical to be talking to students all the time, just because we have so many students and we'll inevitably miss out some of them. So we either need representatives such as yourself, or the rector to be able to talk to, and then trust them to communicate our message to students. But the idea that I put forward on yesterday was to say, well, maybe we need to create like a news sheet that gets emailed once a month to students, for example, that just contain, I don't mean a great screed of the provost's thoughts, but I mean just sort of facts, things that have happened, decisions that have been made, things that might affect students that have occurred in the last month. So that's an idea that I've floated. I don't yet have full agreement that's going to happen, but that's the idea that I would like to take place, and then that would go out to students. If I get my way, Katie, that will be a monthly missive to students.
Thanks, Kate, for the question. I see I have 5 further questions. We've got about 20 minutes to go. So Ashwini, Lucas, Leo, Sammy, and Deanne. Ashwini, go ahead.
Oh, Mr.
Oh, sorry to interrupt. Petra had actually sent a question by chat, so I think she's next, and then Ashwini, Lucas, Leo, Sammy, and Deanne. Apologies for that.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Rebecca. How exactly are the admission category changes expected to help balance the budget? And closely related to this question is actually a question that was submitted for the Senate meeting today. How will a visioning exercise that includes collegial decision-making unfold within the context of these admission category changes? And again, related to that, can we make sure, please, that faculty senators are represented on the Strategic Implementation Operation Task Force that has just been set up by the provost and the principal? Thank you.
Did you say admission changes? Is that what it was? That
yes, including admission category changes. How are they expected to help balance the budget? And don't we also need to emphasize the academic mission here? And how will a visioning exercise that includes collegial decision making unfold within the context of these changes? And can we make sure that faculty senators are represented on the task force that was just established by the principal and the provost?
Petra, are you meaning categories of student for admission?
Yeah, the changes that are going to come to faculty board, I'm sure, on the 26th of January.
I think. Do you mean the changes that are specifically in the Faculty of Arts and Science?
Yes.
Those will come up. Sorry,
Apologies for interrupting. It also looks like Dean Crow had her hand up, so she may be willing to speak.
I think this may be a question that the Dean might be better placed to speak for. Just to say briefly, from my point of view, any changes that are made, such as the ones you're referring to, will come up through the normal routes, which would start in the faculty. So I'll hand over to Barbara.
Thank you.
Barbara.
Yes, thank you, Petra, for your question. There has been a discussion, and we have been working with student affairs regarding recruitment pathways for international students and the system that we have, and aligning it with the other universities around when students come in to check. So, for example, international students want to go directly into economics. So we were looking at different kinds of ways that we could acknowledge that in our pathways for students to see how they can get into a specific program. But this is certainly something that will come to faculty board for discussion. And it's about some work that we're doing around aligning ourselves with the other universities in their admissions categories, and for students to see pathways and the kinds of ways and what kinds of degrees they can be doing in arts and science. And we look forward to discussing that at faculty board. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Then briefly, if I may, back to my question about faculty senator representation on the Strategic Implementation Operation Task Force.
Well, that task force is meeting weekly and is simply looking at the implications for students, the legal implications, the communications implications. I think that Senate is the right place to deal with any of the academic matters that come forward that require changes through the normal processes. I think we have all of that already established.
Thanks, Petra, for the question. I'll go to Ashwini.
Thank you. I just wanted to follow up on Sellers' question about transfer payments. So from faculties, between faculties. So just more detail would be helpful on what factors are included in how we think about what amounts are transferred and whether or not faculties are consulted. And then also, again, just to reiterate the concern about smaller faculties that sometimes operate on tighter margins and like law are sort of in an externally competitive environment. So just more information and detail on transfer payments would be very helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Ashwini.
The deficit mitigation fund was established at the beginning of this year, and as I said, is a flat 1.5% tax on all faculties and, well, all budget units, so we can use that phrase, right? But faculties, schools, and other units. That was imposed by senior management at the beginning of the year, frankly, because we were very concerned about what we thought we could see, which was that there would be problems in faculties, and we needed a safety net, a way of providing a source of funding that would allow us to bring that in to underwrite faculties that had that problem. I think once we're through this point, we need to come together and rethink the way we do these things, and whether a kind of blanket subsidy would remain appropriate, I don't know. But I think at that point, a kind of collegial thinking and decision making about how cross subsidies or subventions might work in a new environment would be very wise. I think personally, I mean, it's a debating point, I suppose, but we're not at that point now. We have a point where we're trying to grapple with the budget. We have the fund, which was done in entirely kind of simply sliced off everybody, and we know, well, it looks like the deficit in arts and science will require us to bring that fund in sometime next year.
Ashwini, I might also add, I mean, you noted Silla's question, and it is related to the budget model generally. I mean, it would be a fiction to say there aren't cross subsidies occurring in the institution already, right? So when you look at the budget model, you think it all seems very scientific and mechanical, but there are ways in which what is paid by one faculty does effectively subsidize another part of the university, right? So implicit in the budget model are already subsidies, which are different from the budget mitigation fund or the deficit mitigation fund. So in the long term, you either address these things through some kind of mechanism of the sort that we have in place right now, but also if a problem in a faculty persists over time, that suggests there's something problematic in the way in which the model is functioning, right? So just an additional thought on that. So that's a longer term issue to be addressed. So I have 5 more, and I think that probably would take us to time. So I have Lucas, Leo, Sammy, Deanne, and Devin. Go ahead, Lucas. Okay.
Thanks. I just want to ask about how bursaries and scholarships and other student aids fit into the budget here. I know game scholarships are definitely endowment funds, but there's a couple general funds, specifically the work study entitlements here. Just kind of making sure that those aren't going to be adversely affected by any budget cuts.
I can't imagine they would be, Lucas. I can't imagine they would be. Matthew?
Yeah, yeah, it was quite hard to hear what was being said, but I think it's about the support for students, in which case that is protected as so that's not exposed to the budget cuts.
Yeah. Great. Leo, go ahead.
Yeah, I would defer my question after Devin. So Devin, go first. If we can switch. Yeah.
Oh yes, yeah. Okay. I have Kristen too, so I do want to take us to Kristen today too. So, but if you would like me to switch with Devin, go ahead, Devin, and then I'll go back to Leo.
Okay. Thanks, Leo. So I'm wondering if you could comment on what what actions are being taken or will be taken in the future to sort of enhance administrative efficiency. I know this was something that was pointed out in the Blue Ribbon panel. There's obviously with the decentralized nature of the university, there's that comes with some redundancies in certain faculties and so forth. And so I'm wondering if you could comment on that. Additionally, I'm wondering if there's some sort of way of assessing or some sort of metric in terms of what any sort of administrative expansion helps in terms of advantageousness for the university in terms of its overall efficiency. There's sort of rankings of university in terms of efficiencies, and we're consistently a bit near the bottom. So wondering if you could comment on that.
Yeah, so you mentioned the decentralized nature of the university, and that does tend to result in us having quite a lot of services that end up being duplicated or sometimes even triplicated. And we are going to need to look at that. We have joined something called Uniforum, which is a data collection exercise run by a company called Cubane, which compares the spend on and the satisfaction with different sorts of services. This will be rolled out through this year. We'll be collecting data on ourselves, and we can then compare ourselves to other Canadian U15 universities, the Russell Group in the UK, the Group of 8 in Australia, for example. So we've just joined that. So that's been something that's happened in the last kind of month or so. And we will be planning a kind of rollout of a kind of administrative efficiency scheme to try and make sure that we optimize the professional services of the university. We want to do this in a thoughtful and thorough way. So while the budget needs to be balanced, we also want to make sure that whatever we put in place after that process is as thought through as possible. So we're trying to sort of not rush helter-skelter into that process and to allow ourselves time to make sure that we get it as right as possible.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Matthew. So now I'll go to Leo, then Sammy, Deanne, and Kristen.
I can go after Diane. Maybe Sammy can go first. Yeah, so.
Sammy, please.
Thank you. Thank you. So the resources coming from the sources are, some sources in the budget are finite, but the income from investments has grown $351 million between 2016 and 2023. Yet the amount of this income that goes to operating budget has not grown proportionally and remains at less than 1%. So I'm just wondering what level of crisis it will take to change the amount of this growing income into the operating budget. Thank you.
I think perhaps that's a question for Donna. Do you think, Matthew? Donna, go ahead.
Thanks, Sammy. A lot of the income that has grown is in the operating budget in terms of our short-term investments. And so if you look at our budget, we are putting more money into the operating budget in terms of short-term investments. The income that you are probably referring to is the pooled investment fund, which is longer-term investments of cash that we don't think we're going to have to be able to or need to use in the next 2 to 3 years. And that balance has grown. As you can imagine, with the drawdown of our reserves and the projected further drawdown of our reserves, we have to move money out of the pooled investment fund in the coming year because we need it to manage operations. And so that balance will go down and returns will go down. The reason that the university has not banked on those returns is if you look at 2021 2022, the pooled investment fund had a loss of 8 point something million. And so the university had to make up the fact that we spent 5.2 million of investment returns on the pooled investment fund as part of our operating budget, and had to make up that shortfall of 8.1 million through reserves that had been set aside in prior years. Last year, the pooled investment fund made returns of 25 million. So we had an extra about 20 million of investment returns on the pooled investment fund, that over and above what we had budgeted. And that went into our reserves, capital reserves, that the university has put aside to enable us to invest in our infrastructure in the future. And it really is, I mean, it's a decision to invest in our future so that we can put money towards greater science buildings and so on. We're one of the only, I think, U15 universities that does not have a new state-of-the-art science building on our campus. And so that's why that was done. And in this year alone, in September, we had a loss on the pooled investment fund at the end of September, and at the end of December, it's a gain of approximately 40 million. We have no idea if that will stay that way by the end of April, at the end of our fiscal year. So it's that volatility that makes it really difficult, and the fact that that's going to go down as we need to bring money out of that pooled investment fund to manage operations. It's that volatility that makes it really difficult to plan for using that fund for ongoing expenses. So that's the issue there.
I guess I would just say that I'm not sure that we would have the same perspective on the volatility, but also it's pretty concerning to hear that this crisis and the devastation of the Faculty of Arts and Science is resting on the construction of a new science building.
I guess the only response to that, Sammy, and it's difficult. Yes, that money could be used to instead of the faculty drawing down on their carry forwards, but it doesn't help pay for the ongoing expenses, because once it's gone, it's gone, and so that's the real issue.
Thanks, Sammy, for the question. Deanne?
Yes, I have 3 questions. Should I ask the 3 of them together, or one and wait for the answer, second one?
So we're at time, Deanne, and I want Kristen to have her turn to ask her question, and Leo as well. So maybe if you could choose the main one, and then we could move to Kristen and then to Leo.
I guess I'll try to combine them. So arts and science has consistently helped other faculties. I mean, during this current budget and before with the old budget model, it was less transparent, but it has consistently helped business, education, engineering, and so on. And so I'm wondering why there's not a bigger taxes on the faculties that arts and science has helped, to reciprocate. I'm wondering why we're not getting rid of the castle that has never has only broken even, and now it would be a big drain on the budget. I'm sure there would be a hotel chain like Fairmont who would love to acquire something like that and make it like a resort. And I'm wondering if donors are being sought, like the big donor they had in engineering to help arts and science.
Matthew, go ahead.
So I think you asked your 3 questions anyway. I think all the different faculties have their own revenue, and they live within their own revenue, and different faculties have accumulated reserves at different levels. As you can see from the starting point of one of my slides, all faculties have reserves. So that means that all faculties historically have been bringing in more money than they've spent. So they've created a savings account. So I think all faculties have done well, and now they're spending those reserves in order to manage their deficits. I don't think we should be going to faculties that are currently currently financially sustainable and taking money out of them in order to cross-subsidize arts and science without a very thoughtful conversation about why we're doing that and at what level we do that. So I think I would be a bit wary about doing a kind of bespoke kind of faculty by faculty kind of tax, because I think we'd end up with a lot of arguments with a lot of other people about exactly what level that should be at. As far as the castle's concerned, I think we need to consider the future of the castle, but in the end, it's very similar to what Donna just described. If theoretically we were to sell it and to bring a certain sum of money in, it would be a one-off amount of money. It would be whatever it was, so many $1 million. It would come in and we could spend it, and that would be good, but it would be one-off. It wouldn't be ongoing. And to be honest, I've forgotten the third one of your questions.
It was the fundraising issue.
On the fundraising, yeah, we're fundraising all the time. I mean, Karen's advancement outfit is looking for donors and is fundraising, and Deans are fundraising. Fundraising is an important part of our mission, and that's going to continue.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dan, for the question. So, Leo and Kristen. Leo, would you like to put your question now? You've been deferring to others, or okay, please go ahead, and then Kristen, I'll come to you for the last one.
Sure. So ranking were a subject of previous discussion at the Senate. The administration emphasized the importance of considering the factor that ranking assess rather than the ranking themselves. Now, Queen's has seen a decline in its ranking, particularly in area like research quality, within the U15 group, which would drop out from the group, and other relative ranking. How is the university actively monitoring the quality of education and research, and how can we gain access to these metrics for transparency?
I can have a go at that, Leo, straight away. Queen's is in no danger of dropping out of the U15. The U15 isn't a body that exists by virtue of the mathematical calculation of research dollars. Research dollars coming in fluctuate. The current shift in our place in gross research revenues in the U15 is the result partly of the impact of COVID on clinical trials, and we know that our figures will be dramatically stronger next year. So the current situation in which we've fallen by 1 or 2 places in research InfoSource is just a result of the way in which revenues come in. And the other thing I would say is there's no evidence of any decline in quality in research. In fact, the success rate of our researchers is very high, and the size of grant enjoyed by researchers at Queen's is very high. So this doesn't reflect negatively on the quality of the work being done. But to your broader question, I mean, the whole point of this exercise is to do our very best to maintain the quality of the education available to students and the supports available to researchers so that people can continue to do excellent work in very challenging circumstances. Kristen, can I go to you for your question? Sorry for the long delay. Go ahead.
Dr. Evans, you said in your presentation that priority is the academic mission to deliver the highest standard in education through a robust research program and excellence in teaching. Can you state clearly how FAS programs are being prioritized as part of your academic mission? Can you tell us what your plan is as provost for ensuring that FAS is protected as a crucial part of the academic mission?
As I said, we're going to be putting a substantial amount of the university's money into providing a safety net for the Faculty of Arts and Science. There's going to be I've forgotten the exact number, but around about $10 million that's going to be required to wipe out the debt of the faculty. That's a considerable investment by us and reflects our values that underpin, how that we, think the faculty is very important and a key part of the university, and we'll do our best to sustain it.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, everybody. We're 7 minutes over, so I'm going to have to bring the meeting to an end. Would someone care to move our adjournment? Thank you, Nathan. Thank you, Lucas. I believe we're adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for your questions. We'll, of course, at our next Senate meeting, we can talk about some of these issues again, and no doubt we'll do so. Thank you.
Recording stop.